All right, let's bring in now Chief Political Correspondent for The Australian, Geoff Chambers. Geoff, thank you so much for joining me. Look, this is a big story, this Chris Bowen pushback to the Coalition's energy plan. You wrote about it on the front page of The Australian newspaper today, and it really opens up another division between the Coalition and the Albanese government ahead of the next election.
Hi, Sharri. It's clear as day, and Peter Dutton said at his press conference today that essentially Australia will not meet net zero emissions by 2050 without nuclear being in the mix. And just before I came on your show, I spoke to a senior Labor source who described the numbers put out by Chris Bowen today as a gross misrepresentation of the idea that the Coalition is putting forward. And that idea, which is backed by very big businesses, including BHP, is to remove barriers and remove prohibition that stops this country even entertaining or investing or looking at where nuclear technology is going around the world. You'll hear Chris Bowen today talk about the two existing SMRs. He says they're in China and Russia. But the work being done by Bill Gates in Wyoming and across the states, the work being done by the UK, this technology will come to scale at some point. And of course, it will take time for Australia to include nuclear in its mix. But at no point has Peter Dutton ever suggested that the Coalition would force taxpayers to fund the construction of 71 nuclear SMRs across the country. That is a complete misrepresentation. They're talking about private sector investment, and we've heard from the private sector, and they're absolutely open and willing this government to move away from that ideology. And what I've heard today, and it's hard to work this out definitively, is that nuclear zero emissions technology is gaining traction in the electorate. I've seen some polling which shows that people are open to nuclear, particularly when you're talking about climate change and reducing emissions. People are much more open to nuclear, and this thought of a Chernobyl type or Fukushima type of gigantic nuclear power plant being built in your backyard. I mean, this is all fear-mongering now. The technology is moving at pace, and the size and scale of that will be very different over the coming couple of decades.
And there would, of course, still be questions to be worked out about waste and where these reactors would be located. But Geoff Chambers, I just have to point out, you broke this story, or you wrote about this story on the front page of the paper today, and you're just breaking the news live on air that you spoke to Labor sources before you came on this program, and they're calling Chris Bowen's figures a gross misrepresentation. Is that right? Labor sources questioning Chris Bowen's figures.
Yeah, and that's right. And I've also seen polling which shows that sentiment on the ground is moving. And say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you mentioned the word nuclear, and people, weren't interested in it. But now we're talking about nuclear submarines, and we're looking at different types of technologies that would be more amenable, particularly as our coal-fired generators come out. You've got ready-made sites for this with connections into the grid. So I think that voter sentiment shifting. I think it's probably worrying Labor as we head closer to the 25 election.
Yeah, and it looks like it is going to be another area where there'll be a big political fight